Have you ever had that feeling that you were in the presence of greatness, true greatness, in the presence of a champion, somebody who's a cut above, a top 1% of 1%, somebody who's made a significant difference with their life? They've done important things, they're special to a completely different level. Greatness. I have had that experience. I've been blessed in my life to have been in the presence of what I consider greatness a handful of times through business, through meeting special people, some of my clients, celebrities, athletes. And it's rare as an honest politician in Washington, D.C. So if you have the opportunity ever in your life, it's something that you need to cherish, something that we need to learn from, and something that we need to share with other people. I had the experience of being in the presence of greatness when I had the opportunity to spend several hours with the late, great, badass Hall of Famer, 3-time NHL MVP, 5-time Stanley Cup champion, the great Guy Lafleur. As you may or may not know, you don't have to be a hockey fan to know that Guy Lafleur was one of the all-time, in my opinion, my biased opinion, one of the top 10 players to ever wear an NHL uniform. In my biased opinion, he is one of the top 3 to ever wear the glorious Montreal Canadiens jersey, putting him in very rare air. The Montreal Canadiens have won 23, count them, 23 Stanley Cup championships. Guy Lafleur winning 5 of those cups as a Montreal Canadian. The sad news earlier this week was that Mr. Lafleur had passed away at the age of 70, which is young, very young. And he had actually passed away from lung cancer. And I was saddened to hear this news because of the fact that I have nothing but tremendous memories of the short time that I spent in his presence. And the long story short is that 8 years ago, and I've shared this once before, I hired the Montreal Canadiens alumni hockey team to come to our small community of Perth when I owned the Blue Wings for a charitable fundraiser. I had just purchased the Junior B team. The team was in near bankruptcy. They had struggled with attendance and corporate sponsorship. The Blue Wings were no longer a part of the fabric of our small town community. And one of the things that I decided to do to re-engage the fan base, to re-engage a level of goodwill, to wake people up to all the changes we had made over the summer, new sound system, new $500,000 locker room, new seating in the rink, new glass, new boards, everything. Reinvent it from the studs up. And I wanted to wake people up. I wanted to grab them by the throat, and I wanted to get them off their phones and off the couch and back to the arena so they could see what we were rebuilding in Perth. No better way to grab a hockey fan by the throat in Canada than to bring in the Montreal Canadiens alumni, led by the greatest, one of the greatest of all time in history, and certainly one of the top 3 greatest in Montreal Canadiens history, the Flower himself, Guy Lafleur. He was accompanied by other Hall of Famers and Stanley Cup winners like Steve Shutt and Guy Carbonneau and Rick Green. But Lafleur, like Raymond Bourque, like Michael Jordan, like these other guys, he's the man, and you can feel it as soon as he enters the building. I'll never forget on the Sunday afternoon, and we sold the game out within a few days. I asked my dad a month before the game, I said, "Dad, would you be interested in being on the bench as an assistant coach or co-coach with the Montreal team?" In other words, coach the Montreal team, which was a really big deal. You used to sell that as part of the fundraiser, but I wasn't interested in selling that. I wanted my dad, who's in the Blue Wings Hall of Fame, to be part of this. So he was like, "Yeah, this sounds great, whatever." So we didn't know until a couple of weeks before the game that actually Guy Lafleur was going to attend. He didn't play in the games anymore because of a back injury. So what he did is he was the coach. He stood behind the bench of the Montreal alumni team. And when he showed up on that Sunday at noontime, the game was on a Sunday afternoon in January, I'll never forget him walking up. They came in the side entrance unannounced with some of his other teammates. They had driven there from Montreal, which was probably a 3-hour drive. And here's Lafleur. He walks in, and upstairs there's myself, my dad, our coaches, and some of our players because we had just practiced. So he walks in first and foremost as the total cleaner that the guy is. He immediately walks over and introduces himself to me. Instead of me, I didn't even have an opportunity. He walks over, he introduces himself to me. He immediately introduces himself to my dad, to all of our assistant coaches. And he's one of these guys who you only have to meet one time until he knows your name. I'm not kidding. Until he knows your name and a little bit about you. The thing I was most impressed about in this first time meeting, first impression, was the fact of how he treated the handful of my players were there. These are kids that are 17, 18, 19, 20 years old, 21 years old. And Guy Lafleur went over to each kid in the locker room. There was about 8 or 10 of them there. And he individually introduced himself, shook their hand, of course, eye contact, larger than life personality. And he just made each of these kids feel important. And these were the kids that were graduating players. They were going to be playing in the game, so they're nervous. They've never been around NHL players, let alone legends like these guys. And what's the impression he puts on these men is this is how a real man conducts himself. You immediately introduce yourself, firm handshake, show interest, genuine interest in the other person, and you make an impact, a positive impact. I've talked about this in many videos where Mike Babcock and guys like that talk about, do you bring air into the room or do you suck air out of the fucking room? That's what it comes down to about being a badass millionaire. Are you an energy vampire? Are you a time vampire? Or are you the type of man who makes things better than when you found them? Do you make things better? When you walk into a room, do you fill that room with energy and oxygen? Do you fill that room with positive vibes? Are you larger than life like a guy like Lafleur or a guy like Raymond Bourque or a guy like Michael Jordan? And those are just sports analogies. It doesn't have to be a sports situation. It's like, are you a taker or are you a builder? So Lafleur was one of these guys where you walk in and boom, everybody in the room is 10 feet tall. Everybody's a couple of inches taller, that kind of influence. And he just made everybody, including myself, my father, my assistant coaches, he just made everybody feel better about themselves. And people are nervous, right? Like, this is the first time a lot of my coaches have met somebody like this. So this is a lasting impression. And what's the lasting impression is, man, class. This is how somebody behaves when nobody's watching. There was no media, there was no cameras, nobody was there. He could have shown up on a Sunday afternoon like a lot of pro guys. I've been around pro guys my whole life. I've been around them even as a child when my dad used to play in these games. And most of these guys, candidly, they leave you wanting. They leave you wanting. It's like, I met him, but I thought there would have been more, or I thought, you know, he would have been different. Well, Guy Lafleur was nothing like that. He was like, holy shit, this guy is even better than I thought. That's saying something. He's even better than I thought. And that's saying something when you have that impression of him being one of the all-time greats. So he gets there, he makes that impact. For the next 3 to 4 hours, you know, him and my dad, they never left each other because they were coaching the team. But I'll never forget them sitting down in the locker room between periods. And what were they talking about? They were talking about the good old days of sport. They were talking about each other's hometown. They were talking about their families, their children. That he was interested in my dad's background, playing for the Blue Wings for 5 years. He was interested in the championships my dad won. He was asking my dad about the hockey coat from 1952 he was wearing. He was asking about the other men that were going to be dropping the puck at center ice at the red carpet treatment. Just interested in my dad and the other people. And like Raymond Bourque and like Wendell Clark, true cleaners, even though, you know, he hasn't played on the team in 30 years, you could see the pecking order. He's still number one. Like Raymond Bourque, like Wendell Clark, like Guy Lafleur, when they're around their teammates, some of these guys are 60, 70 years old. But Lafleur is still the alpha dog. He's still the alpha. Nothing has changed. He told me he participated in all 62 events. That's the other thing. A lot of these guys made their big money and they're like, oh, I don't want to participate in alumni. I've heard that in basketball and football and stuff. Lafleur, he didn't make the big dollars. He missed that, right? He missed that by a few years. But here's a guy who's committed to the organization for all 62 events. And that was on that Sunday afternoon. He also shared with us that that was his third event that weekend. So he did one Friday, he did one Saturday, and he did one in Perth with us that Sunday. So, you know, the guy, if he's an ordinary guy, he's got every single excuse to say, you know, I just got here. We were up late last night and all the other stuff that comes with that. But none of that from Guy Lafleur. It was like, you know what? Game on, bring in that A++ game again. And it is an A+ game. He's got 1,000 people there that are asking him for autographs. He can't even go to the bathroom without people following him in at the VIP dinner. He's got people following him to his car. I mean, it's intense. It's intense. So I don't know how much he gets paid directly, but he earned every single penny of it. But just that attitude of serving and giving back. So him and my dad had a great talk. They spent the 3 hours together. They went to the VIP dinner. We had dinner with Guy and a couple of the other players. And of course, Guy's the guy, right? He's the guy that says grace. Guy Lafleur is the guy that stands up and thanks the kitchen staff, the chefs, the people bussing the tables. Like, I'm talking alpha male class. He's the person that thanks he brings them out of the kitchen. Come on out of the kitchen, standing ovation for all the people, the meal. He does the grace. And then he gets up there like Wendell Clark did, like Ray Bourque does. And in between the drinks and dinner, when the kitchen is struggling to put out, 150 dinners, he stands up. He's like, Michael, give me the microphone. Give me the microphone. And he goes up there like a true badass alpha male, and he starts telling war stories about winning Stanley Cups, playing for the greatest coach in sports history, Scotty Bowman, talking about the good days, the bad days, the parties, the bus rides, the planes, all of this stuff. And people are just eating this stuff out of his hand. He's got the crowd eating out of his hand. And this is it. This is leadership. This is greatness. I'm in the presence of greatness. And I'm just so thankful that I organize things like this so that I can be a part of it. It's funny, my daughter Emery, who's 9, she was only a 1-year-old at the time. And I'll never forget, we're up in the dressing room and I have the photo of Krista, my wife Krista, my dad, and Emery. And Guy Lafleur grabs Emery, she's 1 year old, and he grabs her and he puts her under his arm and he holds her for the photo. So my daughter down the road, she was held by one of the greatest leaders, one of the greatest players, but most importantly, one of the greatest human beings that I've had the pleasure of dealing with. Just little details like that. So it's all over, and we go on with our lives, and the Montreal Canadiens go on with their lives, and it's a smashing success, and that's fantastic. I send them a thank you card and all this other stuff. But here's where the story gets even better. It can't get much better, but because of Mr. Lafleur, it gets better. So 2 years later, 2 full years later, we're up at a place called Montebello, Quebec, which is outside of Montreal where Guy lives. And we're there for Mother's Day brunch for my mom. So we go to this, it's the largest, Montebello is the largest log cabin in the world. In other words, it's a monstrosity. You can ski there. In the summer, it's on the water, but it's just next level. So we go to Montebello for a Mother's Day brunch. We stay overnight the night before, and it's just a really special place. My brother David got married at Montebello. It's really a special place, especially for us. 2 hours away from Perth, an hour and a half away from Montreal. So we're up there. My dad's in the line for the Mother's Day brunch, which is famous, right? And my dad, who's rarely impressed, my dad's one of those guys who he never forgets a name. He's like Lafleur. He never forgets a person's story, that kind of stuff. But the incredible thing in all of this is my dad comes back to the table on this Sunday morning, 2 years later, and he's like, hey, look I just met Guy Lafleur. I just saw Guy Lafleur up there. And we're like, what? My brother and I are like, what? And we look up, and here is Guy Lafleur standing up at the brunch table on a Sunday morning, and he's up there with his mother, and she's an older lady. And I'm like, holy shit. And my dad's like, I said, Dad, did he remember you? And my dad, you have to know his humble humor, sarcasm. And he's like, of course. He said, he said, hello, Frank. And I was like, you're shitting me. There's no way. This is 2 years later. The guy, he knows a million different people and all that kind of stuff. And he was like, he's like, oh no. He said, he came up to me. And I'm like, are you joking? And he's like, no, I'm not joking. So what happened is my dad said that he's in the line getting his breakfast, his brunch with my mom. And all of a sudden, there's a tap on his shoulder when he's getting his, his eggs and his toast and all that stuff. And who is it? He turns around, and who is it but the great one himself, Guy Lafleur. And here's where it goes to the next level of integrity and character and class, where my dad turns around, and Guy says, hello, Frank. Hello, Frank. Are you kidding me? The guy does 62 of these events a year. He's met tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people. Taps my dad on the shoulder. Hello, Frank. And then he turns around and he makes some small talk with my dad. So he's like, how are things in Perth? Well, Perth is a community of 6,000 people. I mean, most athletes would come in there, they do their thing, they get paid, they'd never talk of it again, wouldn't even remember where they were the day before. And here's Lafleur, and what's he saying? How are things in Perth? So my dad's like blown away, right? And of course, he knows who Guy is. And my dad says, man, that was a great game 3 years ago. And Lafleur corrects my dad and says, Frank, that was only 2 years ago you and I coached in that game. It was only 2 years. My God. And he was right. So that's when I talk about badass class, and I talk about you are who you are when nobody's watching. You are who you are when nobody's watching. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is what I preach to my hockey players. This is what I preach to my world building clients. This is what I preach to my daughter, is you are who you are when nobody else is watching. And when nobody else is watching, who are you? Do you treat everybody the same? Do you treat people the same on the way up as on the same way down? Do you treat the person like I've run sports franchises, I've owned them, I've coached pro, I've coached junior, I've done all these things. But how do you treat the people that empty the waste paper baskets? How do you treat the people that pick up your trash at the end of the driveway? How do you treat the summer student who's giving you your coffee and they're just trying to make some money for school? How do you treat, the person who cuts your grass? Or how do you treat, and it's like the great Gary Halbert too. He was the ultimate guy where he didn't put guys on pedestals either. Like, do you fawn over celebrities and athletes, or do you treat them like human beings? Do you give respect to people that don't respect you? Like, do you put people on pedestals that don't need to be on pedestals? It's like my mom told my brother and I when we were little kids, and my dad was going to see Gordie Howe, and he said, I'm going to get you an autograph. My mom had none of that. She said, are you kidding me? McLeans don't ask for autographs. Other people ask for your fucking autograph. That's what she told us. I'm like 12 years old. My brother's like 7 years old, 6 years old, and that's the mentality. We don't put people on pedestals. We respect people by how much respect did they give us. You think I give a shit whether you played in the NHL or you played in the NBA? I've been around those guys my whole life. You think I care about somebody who's a singer on TV or they have a movie? No. I judge people by how much of a difference they make and how they treat everybody else, how you treat everybody else. And in this celebrity-driven culture that we live in, you see so much of this fawning all over people and, oh my God, there's Mike Ditka, and oh my God, there's Jimmy Johnson. Hell, when I'm down in the Keys, Jimmy Johnson's down there pumping his own gas. I'm like, hey, Jimmy. He's like, hey, Michael. Like, who gives a shit? You know, you are who you are. He's a father, he's a husband, he's a football coach. That's who he is. But I don't have to put people on pedestals. But if you do want to put a person on a pedestal, put a guy like Guy Lafleur on a pedestal, not because I don't give a shit how many goals he scored. I don't care about any of that stuff. All I care about is who that guy is when nobody's watching. All I care about is how that man treated my father, how the respect he gave my wife, knowing her name a second time, knowing my dad's name a second time, grabbing my kid at 1 year old and putting her under his arm and saying, taking a photo. And I'll leave you with one more thing about pedestals, okay? You know, talk about, like, there's a great quote that I always teach and I've always remembered it in my own life, and it's this, and this is badass truth, okay? The people in your world will never remember the things you said. They will never, ever remember even the things that you did. People will not remember what you said and what you did. People will always remember how you made them feel. It's all about that. They won't remember down the road when you're gone, you're building your badass legacy and you're doing all these things and you're chasing money and you're pushing people out of the way and all this other stuff. People aren't even going to remember what you said. And they're not even going to remember what you did. People are going to remember how you made them feel. So how do you make them feel? How do you make your wife feel? How do you make your daughter feel? How do you make your adult children feel? How do you make your employees feel? How do you make the person who cleans your waste paper basket feel? How do you make the person who's in the airport cleaning the washrooms when there's 100 people in there taking a piss? How do you make that guy feel? Do you bring air into the room or do you suck the life out of a room? How do you make people feel? How do you make your teenagers feel? How do you make people in your church feel? How do you make people feel? Because that's what they're going to remember. And this is why things like a thank you card are so powerful. That's feeling, that's making somebody feel important because you're treating them important. Remembering somebody's name like Guy Lafleur and commenting about my dad's life. That's how he made my dad feel. You know, how he made my wife feel. My wife doesn't give a shit about sports, but you know what? You talk about Raymond Bourque, you talk about Wendell Clark, or you talk about Guy Lafleur, and Chris is like, whoo, those guys, man, class. How do you make people feel? And that's the legacy that Guy Lafleur has now in his death is man, oh man. And I'll take one more for that just to show you the power of who you are when no one's there, who you are that's no one there. It's like the guy who doesn't return his shopping cart, or the person who looks around and nobody's looking and you cut a corner, or nobody knows whether you walk that day so you don't, or nobody knows that you're not supposed to be drinking but you're cheating, or you're not supposed to be eating those foods. You know what? You are who you are when nobody's watching. So we're walking out. The game is over. It's been over for an hour. The rink is empty. And Guy Lafleur and I and my dad are walking out the side entrance where the players come. There's nobody there. There's some trucks and stuff. And he's walking over to his vehicle. And he's going to be going to the VIP dinner. So he's taking a few minutes here just to decompress before he goes to VIP dinner. It's just people. So Anyways, we're coming out the side door, and here we're about to hit the sidewalk like here, and this lady that I know very well, she was a client of mine, a personal lines home and car client, really nice lady in the community. They run a small cleaning business. And she walks up and she's got this Guy Lafleur jersey draped over her arm. And she kind of, like she's a little bit afraid or intimidated, and she walks up to Guy and she says, "Hello, Mr. Lafleur, I'm so-and-so." She says, "Would I be able to get an autograph?" And this is where badass kicks in. So he understands that, she's a little bit shy. This lady's probably in her late 60s, okay? And she's got her grandson with her, but he's back a little bit. And he says, "Sure." He says, what do you have under your arm there?" And he introduces himself, and he calls her by her name. And he introduces himself to her. And she tells him, and then he says, "Who's this?" And she goes, "Well, this is my grandson. And he came to the game, and he's a big Montreal Canadiens fan." So boom, incredible with children, right? And he's over there, he just, "Come on over, Chad," and all this stuff. And he goes, "I'm Guy Lafleur," introduce him, shakes the kid's hand. The kid's like 7 years old. And then from there, he goes, "Would you like me to sign the jersey?" He's always got the Sharpie, right? He's always prepared. The jersey, he personalizes the whole thing. He goes, "Would you like guys like a photo with me?" And they're like, "Holy shit, this is great." And he goes, "Michael, do you have a phone?" And I'm like, I get a phone here, and I go and I take several photos. And he says, he gets the girls, and we use her phone. So she's got all these photos with Guy Lafleur and her grandson and the jersey. And she goes, "We bought the general admission tickets." She said, "They're $50. That's all that we could afford. And we got them for Christmas for my grandson. And we were happy to watch, you from the rafters in the arena." And she goes, "Michael, I had no idea that I would be able to meet Guy Lafleur in person with my grandson." Literally tears coming out her eyes. And this was just two of the people that he met that day. And because they owned a little cleaning company, I went in there to get my shirts a week later. And the husband, who's the grandfather, said to me, he goes, "Michael," he said, "all jokes aside," he said, "holy fuck." He says, "Guy Lafleur went from a legend to a god in our family." And that's what happens to all of us at different levels when you make people feel good, when you make people feel better than they were, when you build people up instead of tearing them down, when you make people, you challenge them, but you make them feel better, when you enter a room and you make things better, where you don't suck the life out of everything and just take. And Guy Lafleur had an impact on that little family with that little child. And by stopping and not only, doing what they asked, but also making it a next level experience. How can I make this even better? And the grandfather who runs the company, these people stand on a cement floor 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, cleaning shirts. They own a cleaning company, just the two of them, husband and wife. They barely make salt for their porridge, as my dad would say. And they fucking work, and they work. And those $50 tickets are a big deal. And he made it a life event for them. So the guy, he's talking to me, he says, "Michael," he goes, I hate the Montreal Canadiens." And he goes, "Now I love the Montreal Canadiens." He goes, "I don't know what to say." He said, "When my wife came home and told me that story about the way she was treated by Lafleur and how his grandson was treated," he goes, "I don't know." He goes, I said, "Well, he's not a god," but I said, "He's a man who knows how to behave like one. He's not perfect, and he's a hockey player and all that stuff," but I said, "That's not what I'm impressed. That's a guy on a pedestal because of the way he made people feel when nobody else is watching." And trust me, I've used this example a whole bunch of times with my young athletes, where I'm talking about who you are is who you are when nobody's watching. And what's most important is not what you say with your big mouth and not what you do, but it's how you make people feel. And I teach this to my players about how they come in the front entrance. They thank the volunteers, they thank the ticket takers, they thank all the people that make our hockey team work. It's important that they thank them. Just like returning their own trays in the restaurant and taking your hat off at the table and being mentally present. You didn't see Guy Lafleur in 4 hours. And I forgot about this. Not one fucking time did I see him with a cell phone. Not one. He could have been texting his agent, and this is, but I've hired guys lots like that. Oh, fuck, when's this over? And do I have to do this? And how many autographs do I have to sign? Those are takers. Those are takers. They're just there for the money. Guy Lafleur showed up. He was mentally present for 4 hours. 4 hours. I never saw him take his cell phone out. Not one single time. He was present with my dad, my wife, my daughter, myself, and every other fan in that building. There's a lot of lessons wrapped up into being around somebody who's truly special. So that is my tribute video. I know people talk about goals and assists and Hall of Fame and Stanley Cups and all that shit. You know what? I like Hall of Fame integrity. That's Hall of Fame integrity. That's Hall of Fame class. That's a guy who lived his life the right way. He's human just like us. He puts his pants on, two legs, just like my dad says, but Hall of Fame class. And a guy who made people will remember how that guy made them feel. When he walks into a room, he fills it up. He makes people taller. He makes people prouder. He makes people fired up about themselves and life. And there's nothing more contagious, like I tell my athletes, there's nothing more contagious than a positive example. There's a guy who has a blessed life because he's a celebrity, because he's a Hall of Famer and all this stuff. But most of those people don't use that. They don't use that soapbox. They don't use that standard to make any difference. It's all about them. Here's Guy Lafleur, who's recognized by millions of people, especially in Canada. And what does he use that for, especially in retirement? To serve other people. To serve other people. There was no big money to be made there. I was shocked and surprised that he even attended. But he used it to build. He used it to build relationships. He used it to serve people. He used it to make people feel better about themselves. So that's my private story about Guy Lafleur that you're not going to hear from everybody else. It was a true privilege for me to spend a few hours with that man, and it was a privilege for me to share that story with you and for us to think about, you know what? How am I making people in my life feel? And how am I treating the people that I see on the way up and as I see on the way down? And, you know, is your example contagious? And it is contagious. There's no vaccination about an example. It can either be positive or it can be negative. And is the life you're living, is it a warning or is it an example? The life you're living right now, is it a warning for your children and for your grandchildren, or is it an example of how to live? Nothing more contagious than what you do. Not what you say, what you do. Your children are watching, even when you think they aren't. Our grandchildren are watching. Our employees are watching. Our subscribers are watching. Is your life a warning, or is your life an example of how to live like a real man? Guy Lafleur, there's a contagious example of how to live like a real husband, real father, real grandfather, and real legacy builder, community service guy, the whole 9 yards. Here endeth the lesson. Michael McLean, nobullbook.com. If you do not have a copy of my book, you can fix your mistake at nobullbook.com. $20, you spend that on sugar, coffees, and technology when you could be reading a book written by a real man. nobullbook.com. If you like my daily videos, you can subscribe below, leave a comment, like, whatever you want to do. I don't care either way. And other than that, I've got a free training that's going to be coming up. I'm going to be announcing in the next few days. It's 10 insider secrets to building your own personal and professional badass world. And I'm going to be sharing with that over the next couple of days. Maybe on Monday I'll share that in the PS. Until then, 2 words that change my life and 2 words that will change your life. Be relentless.